All right. Welcome to this new session, our Sunday session about cryptoeconomics from cryptoeconomics.hub. And in today's session, what we'd like to do is to have a broad discussion about where do we think the sector, if you will, of cryptoeconomics, or the area of research is going. Slow by slow, but we see some improvements and new directions that this field of research can go forward. And today, what I'd like to do is to introduce you to that debate with an article that I shared about cryptoeconomics primitives. And this is one possible direction or segmentation of the field, if you like, that we can go to. And we'll see pros and cons of this proposal. So without further ado, let's get to it. Please interrupt me whenever you want, because I think this is highly debatable, and a lot of things that are mentioned in the article can be maybe not understood, but taken in a different way than the author is suggesting. So I think this is going to be an interesting discussion for today. The author, by the way, Jacob Horn, is currently working at Coinbase, so take that in mind as well. We might see some biases now and then, but we'll see. So first of all, what he's trying to do is to establish some structure within cryptoeconomics, and he's arguing that the goal is really to go forward in the field of cryptoeconomics by building systems, if you will, closed systems that works as building blocks, that works as they are, and you could even later in the future, maybe you could take that out of one specific project and apply it directly into another context without losing any of its properties and without having any issues regarding security, desirable outcomes of the mechanism, for instance. So it should work like that, right? So this is the way he sees the field going. And the first distinction he does is between cryptoeconomic primitives and category primitives. There's a new post that will come, coming soon, be published soon, he's saying. And the category primitives would be where things like financial primitives, governance primitives, so staking, voting, token primitives, and regulatory primitives would go. And in this article, he's focusing exclusively on cryptoeconomic primitives. So he's first giving some definitions that the cryptoeconomics primitives are based on. So what is a token, a protocol, a mechanism, a primitive that he defines as a well-established generic building block that is designed to do one very specific task in a highly reliable fashion. So as I said, it should work regardless of the project or the context it has been designed in the first place. Incentive system, another aspect, of course, important, and the cryptoeconomics as a field itself, which is, I think, correctly defined as the combination of cryptography and economics to create robust, decentralized peer-to-peer networks, where cryptography is used to prove things that happened in the past, and economic incentives are used to encourage desired properties to hold into the future. Code and economics are intrinsically interlinked. So then he goes on by defining what cryptoeconomic primitives are, and it goes like this. So a cryptoeconomic primitive is a protocol-based incentives systems that are uniquely enabled by a token. And the word uniquely is important, as he says, because so it's also referred as tokenized economic games They enable the coordination and allocation of capital to achieve a shared goal via the use of various economic and cryptographic mechanisms. So as I said before, a cryptoeconomic primitive should be a self-sustaining system, meaning that everything that is in it, everything that was that has been built for it to exist, should be absolutely necessary, or necessary elements of that system. So you shouldn't be able to take anything out of it. Otherwise, it would stop working the way it was supposed to work. So it's really the goal here is to get to a fundamental building block that will always do the same thing and get to the same desired outcomes. In addition to that, a cryptoeconomic primitive should result in a predictable coordination of a set of factors. So regardless of the group of people that will be interacting with a cryptoeconomic primitive, the same behavior, generally speaking, should emerge from a set of actors. And then the first thing he does, the author, is to give us some examples of cryptoeconomic primitives that personally, but I won't get into my opinion now, but I don't know if this is the case already. Maybe you have some ideas about that. But he's suggesting that curation markets, specifically token-curated registries and curved bonding, are two cryptoeconomic primitives that already exist and that are applied in some projects like AdChain, the Ocean Protocol, Relevant, and Messari. I haven't looked at all those projects myself, but those are 4 projects that use curation markets to achieve their goal, right? And then other examples of other primitives that might exist are prediction markets, stable coins, or geospatial markets. So in prediction market, you're trying to coordinate the incentives for people to forecast future events. In stable coins, you're trying to coordinate the behavior of different kind of people, but basically financiers, to take advantage of valuation of an asset to work toward the stability of another asset. And in geospatial markets, what you're trying to achieve is to coordinate people into proving the location of things in the world, right? And behind those mechanisms, or those markets, depends, might also exist cryptoeconomic primitives. But for now, he's arguing that curation markets are a cryptoeconomic primitive that is actually working. Right. So then he's emphasizing the fact that design has been famously, his words, lagging behind in the cryptocurrency industry. And it is really important to achieve a good user experience for the users, but also for the people designing new products and services with those tools, with all those standards that we're seeing emerging right now. He's saying that this is all going toward the better design of cryptoeconomic and cryptocurrency products into making the user experience a lot better. So this is a positive note. And one other important aspect he goes into, which I think is fundamental and also related to our previous discussion, I mean the discussion from last week, because he's making a really good point, I think, and this is that with cryptoeconomics, you won't actually being able to retrieve or to protect the economic value that this system, this set of algorithms can produce, unlike with blockchain-based protocols. So when you create a whole new blockchain, you're automatically in control at first of the tokens of that blockchain, and nothing else that will be built on top of that new blockchain will be possible unless you buy some tokens from that specific blockchain. Now, it's different in the case of cryptoeconomic primitives, so in the case of cryptoeconomic systems in general, because this will exist on top of an existing blockchain. And this is, in the end, just a piece of code, to say it lightly. And therefore, there is absolutely no problem for anybody to extract the piece of code that represents that cryptoeconomic primitive and apply it in another project without you, the author, the developer, being able to do anything about that. So when developing a cryptoeconomic primitive, you have to take that into account, or at least know that this will happen, whether you like it or not. And maybe there will be a way to try to retain part of the value, the economic value that a cryptoeconomic primitive can produce. But for now, this is something I think interesting to take into account. And then comes, I think, the most important, or the most maybe critical part. I'm sorry. I mean, you can argue otherwise, right, of this article, because the last session is called "The whole is greater than the sum of its parts." This is a quotation from the field of complexity, and he's actually quoting Taleb here at the beginning of the paragraph. And this session is really about the combination of primitives that should enable the creation of protocols and systems that were not possible before their existence. And these emergent systems will be greater than any of the individual primitives on their own. So he's suggesting that not only are we going to be able to build cryptoeconomic systems or primitives that will behave as building blocks that you can apply regardless of the project in any context, but you will also be able to combine them together to create another desirable outcome or any results that you'd like your project to produce, without being worried, without having to worry about things like security, like game theory, meaning it's going to be like a plug and play type of technology, which is, I think, quite debatable in my opinion. But he's giving some example or situations maybe that are already happening in the financial area of blockchain with financial primitives, without giving much detail about how those things are combined. But this is where he sees the field already going, where you can combine different projects related to the financial sector, if you will, and take advantage of different aspects of different projects. And in the combination of all these activities that you are performing, you will have you will hedge your risks, maybe, or things like that. Okay, and so finally, he's arguing what I was saying before, that in the future, he sees a world where you don't have to be an expert in cryptography, economics, and game theory to start creating cryptoeconomic systems. You just need to know how to read a spec and implement. Consumer applications are coming, and they are coming fast. And this is pretty much the end of the article. So as I said before, or I mean, I put in the agenda, there is a counter argument to all this, which is in the conversation, in the response section of the article that we will go into a bit later. But first, I'd like to open the floor to comments, questions from the audience. So, who wants to go first?
Hi. My question is, the system he is suggesting in the end, like, plug and play sort of system. There's how the system will work on crypto economic side, that's have to be figured out. It's like, he's suggesting like multiple apps can be, or protocols can be connected in, and you don't have to understand the crypto economic story behind it. But how incentivization sector would play in this part?
Yes, that's a really good question, and I don't have the answer, and I think neither does he. So it's more like a sort of a visionary article, if you will, where he sees the complexity of designing mechanisms and cryptoeconomic systems in general, evolving towards that situation where you could use, those things as building blocks in the same way, I guess, where today you can use a form on your website and you don't have to know everything that works below to be able to let your user interact with your website in some way, right? I don't know if this is going to be achievable at some point. I don't even know if this is really something that we want to happen. And I think we all agree here that when you deal with human behaviors, there is a huge amount of unpredictability and variation that it's sometimes, or I think it's always very difficult to hope for the same results to come out of something regardless of the situation. But I guess if I follow his argument, and to go back to your question, what he is suggesting is that yes, you will be able to combine the individual effects of different cryptoeconomic primitives and align all the incentives of the different maybe tokens or that you use in order to produce exactly the same outcome in your project. Do you yeah, Philippe?
You caught me removing the mute. Yeah, well, I must just say that it's a bit difficult for me to grasp the content, what actually the primitives here stand for, because it seems to be very generic, but at the same time, the fact that it defines a cryptoeconomic primitive as something that results in predictable coordination makes it very specific on the other hand. So it's kind of puzzling. And when I think about, recently I read this article, I don't know if you've seen that, the behavioral cryptoeconomics article from by Elad Verbin.
Yes.
Yeah, so, and with this very important distinction regarding the application of a cryptoeconomic system to, depending on the action space, whether it's a restricted action space or very large and diverse, like...
No, that's not my problem, that's your problem.
Hello?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, sorry, I muted him for now.
Yeah, okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. My point was that the article was very relevant to me in the sense that it was pointing at the fact that a very similar pattern can have very different, widely different results depending on the space you apply the pattern. too. And in this case, it seems that the primitive is kind of seen as having this property that can be used in any system. So it's kind of, well, I don't see that working this way, but of course, since it's difficult to figure out what are exactly the cryptoeconomic primitive is talking about, so maybe just a lack of imagination or knowledge. I don't know if you have an opinion on this.
Well, yeah.
I will add to the Philip's comments that, you know, he is defining everything as an incentivized coordination, and as in, you know, incentives are so much different in comparison of the behavioral economics we are seeing that, and how that shift would be happening it on, you know, by combining, like in there are several markets. It's taking a geospatial, it has different problems of its of behaviors, and versus the prediction markets, people behave something differently in that market and people behave something differently in market. Combining these as in a simple primitive and taking that as an, you know, a layer of you know, in the endpoints, a layer of a layer of an application would be something different, you know. The code, what the point is that, you know, behaviors, and that's a more thing that hasn't been focused, though he's been visionary article about, you know, the things would be happening, but the core principles are still missing it on.
Yes, good point. And what I would add to your comment, I think they are perfectly aligned with my thinking, is that he didn't talk a lot about mechanisms that already exist and have proved themselves to be efficient or to be working the way it was intended, like, for instance, auctions. Auctions are mechanisms that have a backtrack pretty extensive behind them. And generally speaking, if you need an auction system within your project, regardless of the context and the project itself, you can more or less use them as a plug-and-play technology. Maybe this is not yet a cryptoeconomic primitive as defined, but it's something that can be used in the same way the author of this article is envisioning, right?
Yeah, I agree with it, but you know, it's different. The problem is with, you know, when you define the crypto economics protocol and everything, you define a behavior set of things. In auctions, you define that behavior, but you expect that isn't only the layer of working. Here, the behaviors can be different in different segments, and adding the layer is where the trickiness comes on the behavior collision.
Yes, but I don't know. So I'm not an expert in every different primitives is highlighting here, but I kind of think that, for instance, with stable coins, that he says could be a cryptoeconomic primitive, maybe we'll get to the point where one stablecoin design will be mature enough and will have been tested enough so that we could say that this is something you can use in whatever projects. It's always gonna produce the same outcome, which is the stabilization of a crypto asset. With this specific one, I kind of think that this is something that could happen at some point. Prediction markets, maybe that too. Now, where I don't see it happening is with the combination of those, right? Because for all of what you've just said, and the external example of, and actually is the same person that we were. So this Elad Verbin guy from Berlin, I think he's working in Berlin, and the one who wrote the article about behavioral cryptoeconomics left him a long response in the article saying that although he's not a security expert or engineer. He worked for almost 10 years in the field of machine learning. And in machine learning, he says that the same thing happened at some point. So engineers were talked about or talked into the idea of treating machine learning primitives just like normal algorithms, and that they can be composed willy-nilly, as he says. So you can combine them the way you want, and this is going to work as a charm. And the results were absolutely disastrous, because and we're not even talking about behavioral things here. So it just if you want normal algorithms, but it is absolutely insane to think that combining things that works separately will work normally when you combine them. And so here we have a previous example of a field where we thought that was possible, but actually the results are pretty much disastrous when you try to combine things together without reflecting on the interactions and the maximization of error, for instance, that can happen and lead the results to something completely different from the intended objective in the first place. So this was a counter-argument I was talking about, that we already have an example of where this won't work. But I guess my interest in this article was maybe not so much into this as a possibility of something we should work on, and more about how to try to establish or think about a structure within cryptoeconomics as a field. And I don't know if you have an opinion about that, but I think this might make sense in the way he's separating the different kind of cryptoeconomic systems.
Yes, Laurent. The way he is, defining everything and separating each part, that is the core thing that I learned from the article, that, like curved bonding and TCRs, etc., and how this can impact entire things. So so he's clearly defining what are the primitives and what are the tokens and what are the protocols is, and what is their limit, and how to how the system can enhance in itself.
Yeah, I might add that there's nothing wrong with listing different components that can be used in different contexts. Maybe what is kind of misleading is the term primitive, because it really looks like and the building blocks. So it really looks like or sound like it is something that is can be used like in programming, and you can build a system that is composed of those different elements that you organize in the way that you want in order to have a very determined result. And we're not talking about algorithm here, and we're talking about incentives, and it sounds far-fetched in my opinion. Well, there is something that is, it made me think of the post by Trent McConaughey, on our Ocean Protocol. I'm sure you've read this one. And actually used, I went back to it, I may have it in front of me. Used as well building blocks in the section called Token Design Patterns. And he said that building blocks are starting to emerge, so that's kind of interesting. And he's talking about TCR as well, but he actually used another term, which is pattern, and I think that's much better. You can use different patterns; they are not necessarily deterministic, They are more like a way to understand from science perspective and to implement from a builder, an architect perspective. To build a system. So you expect some kind of result using a different type of pattern, but it's not just like you know, this predetermined result that can be obtained from assembling a different component in a very mechanical way.
Right. But if we take the example of identity, for instance, on the blockchain, don't you think that at some point we'll get to a situation where you don't need to reinvent identity management system yourself in your projects, but you can use some sort of standard that comes from elsewhere?
Yeah, but that's a subsystem. That's not or maybe I got it all wrong. Okay, but it doesn't sound like a cryptoeconomic incentive primitive. Sorry, the way they defined it. It's just a system, and systems are composed of systems themselves. And you know, you mentioned the complexity theory, and of course, when you design a system, architect a system, then you have to reuse some different type of building blocks. But the issue here is not about the fact that you need building blocks. It's the definition of building blocks. And I'm fine using or defining or considering building blocks in a system when I know that by using this block, I get this input in it, and I get this output, and I know how it works. What are the different outputs that are to be expected when there is this input? But here we're talking about again cryptoeconomics. So I don't know. For me, there's level of uncertainty that goes with it, or complexity that it's hard to reduce to a subsystem.
I agree.
Philip, I would.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I would add that the term he's defining with the primitives is, is defining on the basis of a term, once the protocol, it's protocol and incentivized mechanisms have not been, have not been set or have not been gotten to level that, that standardization of subsystem level can be met. That is the reason he is, defining a term as a primitive, as in, once the entire mechanisms and protocols have been set, and that is how that they can connect with it. That's how I am getting it. So the way the protocols are working at present right now, they have to be evaluated much more further and streamlined much more further. And then there would be a situation would be coming it on that these can be used as in primitive. I'm short of learning such things from him, but I don't know. Maybe what is your opinion? I mean,
yeah, also, I would add to that the fact that maybe this is new to us right now, because we're not used to talk about technology that can embed human behavior in its core. But this is exactly what blockchain technologies are about, right? And this is the first time in history where we can actually scientifically experiment and design a system where the psychology of the user can be included into the design itself, and hopefully reproduce the same desirable outcomes if this is the objective. And as we see with cryptoeconomics, this is actually the objective, right? To design games on the rules of the game, to produce again and again the same outcome. And I would use a proof to that. The the exact field of behavioral economics was done not by economists, but by psychologists, right? And when they discovered the science behind decision-making and applied it to economics, it was by designing experiment and doing questionnaires and run those experiments on human beings. And after doing them again and again for a long time, they statistically demonstrated that this seems to be the way human beings are working, or are doing, or are taking those kind of decisions, or are feeling and reacting in this particular context, right? And slow by slow, they accumulated evidence to demonstrate that human beings seems to be working the way they are, and this is for that reason that the field behavioral economist came into existence, and that they won the Nobel Prize in the end. But I think it's not far-fetched to think that at some point we will get to a situation where you can use a piece of technology that also includes some aspects of human behavior within it. I mean, you can take proof of work as an example as well. In proof of work that has been working for 10 years now, you see that a cryptoeconomic system is designed with the behavioral aspect of its users interacting with it, and it has always produced the same outcome after 1 decade already. And you can use it in very different projects now. It's always the same thing, of course, but this is working. The question is, when... Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, it's working in a particular context. And the question here is that it's whether it can be used as a building blocks of something else.
Mm-hmm.
That's the point, right?
That's the point. Yeah.
So and even more combine in order to deliver some predetermined effect as well. So back to your comment regarding the this other article in learning, I think we're ready for some surprises.
Correct. With the combination part,
yes.
I think we can be even more skeptical.
Yeah, the combination, the application field, the scope, and everything. It doesn't take a lot to have actually this kind of mechanism, even very neatly defined as proof of work, working in an unexpected manner if you change a few, parameters, context.
Yes, but just take one. I don't know, prediction markets, right? Right now we have a bunch of different projects doing the same thing or trying to achieve the same goal, and they all do it differently. For now, all those projects are individually cryptoeconomic systems with their own tokens trying to do the same thing. But I think if we take that argument of achieving cryptoeconomic primitives, what we might get to is to a situation where a prediction market is some sort of standard. There is no point in issuing a token to do prediction market anymore, because this is something that has been worked out already, and that if you need it, you can just bring the algorithm about prediction market and plug it into your project to cover one specific part of it. I think this is the I mean, it's the way I understood the article or the vision behind it.
Yeah, well, if that's the case, first I would argue that yeah, okay, I understand what you mean. Maybe it worked that way. Maybe actually it could be more specialized, but I think it's not the core of what you were arguing. So you could end up with different prediction market implementation, because one size does not necessarily fit all. But yeah, assuming that the space matures, and to the point that we have one or several systems that are proven, then yeah, okay, you can use them and apply them to a particular context. But is there still some substance to the article by just saying that I'm using some proven mechanism in the system that I'm on? I think that there was some buzzword with the building blocks that I cannot see, where the substance is.
Maybe. Sandra, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to say something to your discussion around proof of work. It's now a little bit late, but I didn't know when to interrupt.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I don't want to interrupt, actually. So yeah, I mean, we've seen proof of work working, more or less, but it's also really simple mechanism. So as also described in this article you mentioned now, Philip, because we already did a session around this, yes, you missed this with the behavioral economics. And he said in this article that proof of work is a really automatic mechanism. So there's not a lot of human interaction, and humans can also not really choose what to do. They only try to find the hash the fastest they can. And nevertheless, even though this is such an easy mechanism in the sense of there is only a few conditions and there's not a lot of space where you can make different interactions, still proof of work has changed so much in the way it works over the last years, because our environment is constantly changing. So this is, I mean, look where ASIC mining has gone to. And I think all these really small mechanisms, they can become really monsters. And therefore, I'm really skeptical in general to already design really complex mechanisms. So I think we should first try to understand the basics and how they interact. That was another thing you both mentioned, like the interaction will be really complex to predict, and I believe so too, that this is absolutely out of our scope. So how will proof of work change once we have some running with proof of stake? And yeah, I would like to see first some simple mechanisms, and then, okay, how does this go? How can we advance from here? Yeah,
good point. I think the use of that scale between what was the two extreme, automatic, and I don't remember what was the other extreme of the scale, but this is
this was the choice. So one is how automatic, and the other was your active space or something like this. So like, for example, in social media, you can do a lot of different things. You can post, you can vote, but in proof of work, you can only create a hash. So it was something like your activity space or something like this. So, yeah.
All right, yeah, it was a two-axis graph, I remember now. But yeah, I mean, in general, this is, I think, the way to go. Start from the simple things and then keep going to the more complex stuff later. Rupesh.
Yeah, Laurent. So I haven't gone through the Ocean protocol. So if anyone has gone through, he's saying that it is using both, TCR and curved bonding. Can someone guide me how they are using it, and if someone has gone through it?
Unfortunately, not enough into the details of the token design to quickly explain it to you right now. But we might do it in another session. Yeah.
Okay, I thought that it would be connected to this, but it's something different than that's not.
No, it's connected in the sense that it was mentioned as one of the 4 projects that are working on TCRs and curved bonding as potential cryptoeconomic primitive?
I think, hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think as far as this TCRs are concerned, from what I know, it's more like, say, if you want to list something, if you want your website list or something, there will be a pool of, you have to pitch the token which is in the platform, and you have to stake some amount, and there will be a group of people who will be authenticating your website, I mean the credentials and all, and they will be incentivized to do that. So it's more like the same incentive structure here. You will have volunteers curating you regarding your credentials. They get paid for that, and you have to stake your tokens to get listed on the website or onto the platform, so that you will have your product will have more visibility. And if anybody tries to hook up something or try to degrade you or something, they will be punished. Like then that all these volunteers who are curating you will be they are entitled to stake a certain amount to be a part of this curation, to be a curator. So it works, I think, on the same reward and punishment methodology. That's what I have understood from this TCR thing.
Yes, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if we really try to get to the bottom of what those two types of algorithms are doing, in the case of TCRs, what you're trying to do is to decide in a decentralized fashion whether something should or not be included in a list. That's it. So whether something is on the list or off the list, and you have to make people interact and vote to decide the final state of this list. And in the case of curved bonding, what you're doing is not a 0 or 1 type of inclusion into the list, but a scale of subjective level or score, if you will. So you could start doing more elaborate things with the elements of that list, right? So that can go into opinions of people about the element of the list or something like that. But in essence, they are pretty simple algorithms in the sense that you're working on a list and you have to include things or disregard them from the list.
Okay, so that is the reason I wanted to understand how he is defining them as a primitive. So we know about the TCRs and we know about curved bonding, but the combination of both the things can't be defined as a primitive alone. It requires more and more sophisticated protocols in itself. These are both interlinked protocols. I would say that's already working in the environment presently.
Yes, but they might be, or they might exist or serve different objectives separately, but into one single project. I think in the Ocean protocol, what they are doing with both is first to use TCRs to disregard fake or bad data that then will be included into a market, and how the market will, for instance, estimate the price of the data that will be exchanged. They need the appreciation of the potential users or buyers of that data, or people that know about the data. And so they use curved bonding to go further into the valuation of that data in a more elaborate way than just in or out. So, I mean, just to say that this might be an example of those two different algorithms or primitives existing, serving a purpose independently, but joined together into one single project. But I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, but there are multiple cases of I have seen there's multiple civic. Someone is using civic for identification part, and then using something for polling like civic, and then identification is something. But I wanted to understand that how different, TCRs and crowd bonding, the mechanism or behavioral system, incentivization system that Ocean Protocol wants to set are related with the protocols that they are choosing it. I want to understand that something like, in the primitive system, if identification systems comes up and something like, voting system from civic comes up, how then the system and behaviors would affect then? Would the primitive remain the same, or, the idea he is defining it, or will there will be a collision of an incentivization system at some point of time?
Yeah, good point. And I think that actually the Ocean Protocol, for instance, are already using a flavor of TCRs that they call MTCRs or something like that. So yeah, as you mentioned, it's hard to see something as a building block today, because you always need to adapt the technology to your specific needs.
Yeah, that's why pattern is a better word, in my opinion. But may I ask something that is not really cryptoeconomics, but you piqued my interest, Laurent, at the beginning, saying that there might be some kind of biased and agenda for this article, because maybe related to Coinbase. So I have absolutely no clue what you were referring to. Could you?
Oh, well, no, I don't know. I just thought it was worth mentioning at the beginning. I mean, usually they're not doing things without reasons, right? So I guess that what they're trying to do with those kinds of articles is to highlight some possibilities or some interesting directions that they would like the whole space of blockchain to go into. And therefore, they think that by bringing the attention of developers or investors into one direction, they might get to an interesting new equilibrium, or a level of evolution of the space in general, so that them as investors can take advantage of, or something like that.
Okay.
I've seen the same thing happen with Polychain Capital, for instance. They go out saying that, oh, yeah, this new design is really interesting, and we think that more developers should pay attention to this and all that, which is fine, but it doesn't come free or without any underlying intentions, I think. So that's just, and as we've already discussed, yes, cryptoeconomic primitives are maybe a buzzword, or maybe something worth reading to understand a little bit more where the field is going, but maybe not. Maybe this is just something that won't happen, and people that know what they're talking about don't think that way at all. So
yeah, see, maybe I'm sorry I was late. Maybe I'm asking this because I skipped the earlier part. Going by the definition, can we call a blockchain platform itself a primitive? Because all those platforms will involve this cryptography, incentive, token design, or is it like something different if we call something explicitly a primitive?
Well, as maybe Sandra, you want to take that one, but as you already mentioned at some point, proof of work is a cryptoeconomic system that is very simple and do one thing only, and after 1 decade in a pretty reliable fashion. So therefore, we could argue that proof of work is a primitive itself. Now, it's not the only thing that you need for a blockchain or blockchain that use proof of work to exist, but this mechanism is by itself sufficient to make a proof of work type of blockchain to exist. So yes. Now, when you try to use proof of work into different contexts, what we've seen so far is that you can replicate it. So you use it again to create a new proof of work type of blockchain, but you can't really include it, as far as I know, into another project that do something different, or that do more than just being a proof of work type of blockchain. So in this regard, maybe that's not a really good example of cryptoeconomic primitive. I don't know, just thinking out loud here.
Yeah, I think it doesn't have to be proof of work, but what we definitely need is a consensus algorithm, because as we are moving towards decentralization, we don't have, as we all know, we don't have a central point who's telling us what to do, when to do, so we have to reach consensus, and this by an algorithm. And this, at the moment, is proof of work mainly, but can and will maybe, yeah, will change. So maybe a primitive is a consensus algorithm in general. Proof of work is an example of one.
Okay.
I would say.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. We are reaching the end of this session. Maybe one last point. Rupesh, right?
Yeah, so Philip was pointing out you were pointing out, Philip, that yes, it's a bias. I see, at some point of time, Coinbase is want to be in the space of APIs and exchange of the protocols. That is the reason they are looking forward to push this here in the system, that developers should focus on that integration and all this part. That is, I think, they would be playing with, maybe because of the reason that they have grown so much in the past.
Yeah, that might be the reason. I don't know. All right. If there is no more comments, then we can give this session a go. So, yeah, Sana?
Sorry, no. To say anything, it's just my phone falls out.
Okay, false alarm. All right. Thank you very much for attending this session, and we hope to see you in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you all.